We're beginning Chapter 14, Fraudulent Celecoxib Trial and Other Lies. Companies cannot be expected to play the role of judge and jury, and there is a real risk of fraud. Prescrire International about the class study. Pharmacia later, bought by Pfizer, published a large trial, the class trial of celecoxib, Celebrex, in JAMA in 2000, which was fraudulent. All study authors were employees or paid consultants to the company, and 8 U.S. medical schools had contributed authors. According to the paper, celecoxib resulted in fewer stomach ulcers than the two comparators, diclofenac and ibuprofen, and 2 clinical experts wrote a favorable editorial in JAMA. One of the editorialists was furious when he learned later, because of his membership of an FDA advisory committee, that it was not one trial, but 2 trials bundled together to look like one, and that the trials ran for 12 and 15 months, not for 6 months as stated in JAMA. The protocols for the 2 trials differed markedly from the published paper in design, outcomes, duration of follow-up and analysis, and the advantage of celecoxib disappeared when the protocols specified analyses were performed by independent researchers. People in the company knew perfectly well what they were doing. In one email, an associate medical director at Pharmacia disparaged the way the study was being presented as data message for no other reason than it happens to look better. In another email, a medical director at Pfizer described it as cherry-picking the data, even as officials were publicly boasting of the study's success. Internal documents showed a game plan on how the company might present unwelcomed findings. Worst case, we have to attack the trial design if we do not see the results we want. If other endpoints do not deliver, we shall also need to strategize on how we provide the data. A slide proposed explaining poor results through statistical glitches. The FDA's advisory committee concluded that, based on the full data, celecoxib exhibited no advantage in reducing ulcer complications over the 2. Starting that over, having a bit of some trouble today. The FDA's advisory committee concluded that, based on the full data, celecoxib exhibited no advantage in reducing ulcer complications over the 2 old, much cheaper drugs. The FDA's statistical reviewer explained why the committee meeting in 2005 was also... The FDA's statistical reviewer explained why the company's arguments for the 6-month analysis were obviously invalid. A company meeting in 2005 was also illuminating. All 32 participants considered that celecoxib, rifecoxib, and valdecoxib increased the risk of cardiovascular events. However, the drug agencies continued to drag their feet and downplay the facts. For example, the Danish drug agency changed its product information for etoracoxib, Aracoxia, a Merck product, a week after the FDA meeting, so that it now said that clinical studies suggest that the group of selective COX-2 inhibitors may be associated with a risk of thromboembolic events. No way. The term suggests maybe and associated with document just how difficult it is for drug agencies to acknowledge the harms of drugs they have approved. Here is an honest version. Clinical studies have shown that the group of selective COX2 inhibitors increase thromboembolic events. Note that I left out a risk of when a harm has been shown to occur in randomized trials. It is not a risk of harm. It is a real harm. We don't talk about the chance of benefit. We talk about benefit, and therefore also need to talk about harms. It is so typical for regulators and industry to use different language when they see what they like to see from what they use when they prefer to close their eyes. Merck Denmark must have welcomed this wool-and-mouth statement, as its letter to Danish doctors 5 days later said that selective COX2 inhibitors can possibly be associated with a risk of thromboembolic events. Oh dear. Merck had just killed more than 100,000 patients with Vioxx, but didn't even on this occasion admit the proven cause-effect relationship, but said that such drugs possibly associated with a risk. Downgraded the unwelcome facts 3 times in just 5 words is something of an achievement. In 2002, a Pfizer-sponsored meta-analysis was published in the BMJ, which shows how risky it is to collaborate with the industry. Even for a skilled statistician who has done a lot of good work for the Cochrane collaboration, the paper surprised many of his Cochrane colleagues when it came out. It claimed that celecoxib leads to fewer serious gastrointestinal events, and the abstract only mentions relative benefit, not absolute benefit, which was far more modest. The authors only included the misleading 6-month data for the class trial, which was by far the biggest one. What was more strange, however, was that although the gastrointestinal events described in detail over several pages, including many graphs, there were no data on thromboses, which makes the review completely worthless. The authors, one of which was from Pfizer, explained that the review was limited to assessing only upper gastrointestinal safety, with the excuse that the trials did not report on thromboses. This excuse is pathetic. It is irresponsible not to report the number of thromboses, given that it is the most important harm of COX2 inhibitors. Furthermore, the clinicians are obliged to report all serious adverse events immediately to the company, which means that the company must have had data on thromboses, whether or not they preferred to forget about them. In fact, thromboses were reported in the class trial, and even using only the misleading 6th-month data, there were 4.3% serious adverse events with celecoxib and 4.2% with the other 2 drugs. In other words, no advantage at all for celecoxib. The manipulations paid off, as they always do. About 30,000 reprints were bought from the publisher, and less than 2 years after its publication, the class trial had already been cited 169 times, and the sales increased from $2.6 billion to $3.1 billion in just 1 year. The fraud at JAMA, which has been propagated in many meta-analyses, must have been worth billions of dollars for the company. The decision to report only data for the first 6 months was taken post hoc while the trial was running. The company might therefore have known beforehand that it would benefit the drug not to report the full data. In reply to the criticisms, the author wrote that their decision was made before the trial analysis was completed. This explanation stinks. I'm sure that if pharmaceutical, Pfizer, the other 2 authors of the meta-analysis weren't involved with the trial, although they say we, in their reply, had made this decision earlier. During the trial's execution, the company would have told us, and if they had made the decision without looking at the data, they would have told us, as it would have strengthened their credibility. Another problem was that in the class trial, adverse events were only recorded if they occurred within 48 hours of stopping the drugs in case a patient dropped out because of harms. This appallingly bad trial conduct means the company might have missed many cases of myocardial infarction and other thromboses on celecoxib. The lies continued. A vice president for clinical research at Pharmacia in the United States claimed in 2002 that the analyses and outcomes were pre-specified and the class was a single study. The lies were forcefully rejected by independent researchers who noted that also in Pharmacia's successor study to Class, the Success 1 study, the company had pooled results from different protocols with different comparator drugs. Pharmacia's statements were also rejected by the FDA's statistical reviewer, who remarked that the company had conducted at least 34 subgroup analyses that were not pre-specified in violation of the trial protocol that stated that the primary outcome should show a statistically significant difference before any subgroup analyses would be undertaken. As with Vioxx, trials purporting not to have found a risk of thromboses found their way to cardiology journals, for example, American Journal of Cardiology. Even as late as in 2009, Pfizer played games denying the problems with its drug. It funded a trial in general practice comparing celecoxib with other NSAIDs, but the funding was concealed in the invitation for an investigators' meeting, which said the University of Dundee sponsored the trial. There was a 2-week run-in phase before the randomization where all patients would receive celecoxib, which invalidates the trial because those who cannot tolerate the drug don't get randomized. The information to the patients stated that the evidence wasn't conclusive as to whether celecoxib increased heart disease and strokes. The lie should have caused the Research Ethics Committee to reject the trial. I have a product summary from February 2005 that mentions the cardiovascular problems and a letter from Pfizer to doctors that acknowledges that the drug causes them and says that celecoxib should not be used in patients with ischemic heart disease or with cerebrovascular disease. Furthermore, in 2005, the U.S. National Cancer Institute published a trial of celecoxib for prevention of colorectal adenoma in the New England Journal of Medicine, which was terminated prematurely for safety reasons, as celecoxib increased significantly cardiovascular events. And a meta-analysis conducted by independent researchers using FDA data showed in 2006 that celecoxib doubles the number of heart attacks compared with placebo. The authors contacted Pfizer for details about its trials, but Pfizer didn't provide any. This illustrates that the responsibility of doing trials should be taken away from the drug companies. No shit. We let them get away with their frauds and lies too easily. When Merck withdrew Vioxx from the market in 2004, Pfizer grabbed the opportunity immediately. The next day, the company wrote to Danish doctors that celecoxib had been used in more than 50 million people worldwide, and that the company had reviewed clinical trials in more than 400,000 patients. That's what they wrote. I suppose they meant 40,000. And that this had not yielded any signs that celecoxib increased the risk of cardiovascular side effects. The fine for this ruthless misinformation was $2,000. 50 million people. How many deaths because of thrombosis is this? Using the same calculation as for rifacoxib, we get 75,000 deaths. In addition, celecoxib has killed many thousands of patients because of ulcer complications, and that's only up till 2004. The drug is still on the market. This is similar to the estimated number of deaths caused by Vioxx. I wonder why our drug agencies haven't withdrawn celecoxib and similarly dangerous NSAIDs. The Danish drug agency did react, however. It withdrew the reimbursement of celecoxib and similar drugs 1 month after Vioxx was withdrawn, which saved many lives. Compared to 2003, the use of celecoxib in 2005 was only 10%, as in 2007 it was 4%. I remember those commercials. Celebrex. Pfizer continued to protect its drug rather than the patients' lives. 4 days before the reimbursement disappeared, the company wrote to all Danish doctors complaining it created a dilemma for the doctors and was a step backwards for the patients who were denied access to new medicines. Pfizer's letter contained a form the doctor could use to apply for reimbursement for individual patients, and the company established a separate phone line where doctors could be advised what they should do. The company also put ads in the Journal of the Danish Medical Association showing the elderly lady dancing on the table with the text, "Life is too long to have pain." I reproduced the ad in a paper I published in the same journal and added, "and too short to die of myocardial infarction." Indeed. Apart from withdrawing a drug from the market, withdrawal of reimbursement is the most powerful tool the authorities have. The committee that deals with these decisions has received remarkably similar letters of complaint from doctors in the whole country, orchestrated by the company, another example of drug whores. Pfizer was very worried that its fraud could lead to many legal proceedings, and its lawyers harassed not only JAMA, but several other prominent journals. More than 3,000 lawsuits have been raised against Pfizer, alleging the company marketed celecoxib and valdecoxib as being without the adverse effects of the old NSAIDs. Pfizer issued subpoenas to get access to all peer-reviewed Pfizer issued subpoenas to get access to all peer reviews, rejected manuscripts, and editorial decisions about papers submitted to JAMA on the two drugs. Obviously, these unpublished materials couldn't have played any role in Pfizer's appalling marketing conduct, and the judge appropriately quashed Pfizer's subpoenas. Although peer reviewers are guaranteed anonymity, Pfizer asked for their identity. I wonder what their idea was: to sue the peer reviewers or harass them in other ways, for example, via their superiors. The habitual lying took a new turn in 2012 when investors' lawyers accused Pfizer of having destroyed documents about the development of celecoxib and valdecoxib in bad faith and compounded their initial misconduct by making false statements about the existence of centralized databases. Pfizer denied the existence of the electronic databases containing millions of files about the drugs and argued that the existence of the e-rooms were a figment of the plaintiff's imagination. However, Pfizer officials later acknowledged the rooms existed and turned over documents stored electronically. The lawyers also complained that Pfizer's technical staff undertook 2 dismantling projects while this case was pending. In response, Pfizer's lawyers filed a new lie saying, "At no time did Pfizer ever mislead plaintiffs concerning the existence of databases." Marketing is harmful. A Canadian study showed that the bombardment of doctors with sales pitches about COX2 inhibitors, claiming that the drugs have fewer gastrointestinal adverse effects than the old NSAIDs, aggravated the problem. The total sales of NSAIDs, including celecoxib and rofecoxib, increased. As more patients were now treated, a declining trend in hospital admissions for gastrointestinal hemorrhage changed to an increase. The COX2 inhibitors are a prime example that fraudulent research and fraudulent marketing are very harmful for patients and very lucrative for the companies that our most prestigious journals lend their pages to the deceptions. I would say their deceptions, but okay. A 2001 review article in the New England Journal of Medicine about the coxibs was utterly flawed. The 2 authors had financial ties to the makers of Vioxx and Celebrex, and their paper was a shameful advertisement for the drugs to the point of even mentioning the non-existing advantage of Celebrex that the FDA had forbidden the company to make. The serious harms of the 2 drugs were dismissed in a most unacademic fashion. I wonder how many millions of dollars the journal made on selling reprints of this totally misleading review. The same year, both drugs were among the top 10 selling drugs in the United States. I remember. Were it not for the power of marketing, the popularity of new drugs would be difficult to understand. The risk of taking a new drug is greater than the risk of using an old one, as it takes time before the harms of new drugs become known. As an example, the COX2 inhibitor lumiracoxib, Prexige from Novartis, was approved by the EMA in 2006 and withdrawn a year later because of serious liver problems, including death. It was never approved by the FDA. The NSAIDs are very dangerous. Even before the COX2 inhibitors were NSAIDs are very dangerous. Even before the COX2 inhibitors, we caused deaths on a terrible scale with NSAIDs. It has been estimated that 3,700 deaths occur each year in the United Kingdom due to peptic ulcer complications in NSAID users, corresponding to about 20,000 deaths each year in the United States. In agreement with this, it was estimated in 1999 that more than 16,000 Americans died from stomach ulcers caused by NSAIDs, roughly the same number as those who died from AIDS. This makes NSAIDs one of the most deadly drug groups. The tragedy is that many of these people could have had a good life without NSAIDs, but marketing has lured doctors into using NSAIDs for virtually every kind of pain, assisted by prostituted rheumatologists. a journal writing about Vioxx and Celebrex called a National Society of U.S. Rheumatologists in 2000 to speak to an expert who wasn't being paid by either company. She was told there was none. People who tell the truth get punished. In 2002, an independent Spanish drug bulletin wrote that the so-called advantages of celecoxib and rifacoxib were scientific fraud. Merck sued while Pfizer did not, perhaps because taking action would lead to a worse outcome for the company. Merck misrepresented the court's verdict, which was that the Spanish company, which was that the Spanish Merck was sued while Pfizer did not, perhaps because taking action would lead to a worse outcome for the company. Merck misrepresented the court's verdict, which was that the Spanish article was accurate, that it reflected the debate on the ethics of publications in medical research, and echoed the FDA's warnings to Merck regarding misleading information on the cardiovascular adverse effects of rifacoxib in promotional materials. Merck stated only 6 months before it withdrew Vioxx that MSD is fully committed to the highest standard of scientific. MSD, Merck, Sharp, and Dorm is fully committed to the highest standards of scientific integrity, ethics, and protection of patients' well-being in our research. We have a tradition of partnership with leaders in the academic research community. Great. Let's have some more of such ethical partnership. They often kill our patients while everyone else prospers. Perhaps Hell's Angels should consider something similar in their PR. We are fully committed to the highest standards of integrity, ethics, and protection of the citizens' well-being when we push narcotic drugs. We have a tradition of partnership with leaders in the police force. Yeah, ain't it the truth? And chapter 15? Yes, chapter 15. Switching cheap drugs to expensive ones in the same patients. Next time.